especially if it's your first deal and you don't have that track record. I'd say any percentage is a good percentage because there's a certain value that it brings in terms of credibility.
Welcome to Multifamily Insights. I'm your host, John Casman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Listen, if you're enjoying this show, I need you to do me a quick little favor. Leave us a rating and review. It helps us learn more about you, our listener, but what you're working on. It helps us get the feedback we need to help you get the information you need to succeed as a real estate investor. And listen, if this is your first time listening, or for some reason you just haven't done it yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. We've got a great show today. We're going to be talking to Tim Little. Hey, Multifamily Insights listeners, if you're looking to invest beyond multifamily, make sure you check out the Invest Beyond Multifamily Conference this fall, Wednesday, October 11th through Friday, October 13th, here in Cincinnati, Ohio. Listen, you're going to learn how to invest in non-residential commercial real estate and master the art of scaling your commercial real estate business. Now, this event is being hosted by Ash Patel, guest on the show, and he's featuring great speakers such as Nate Barger and Joe Fairless. If you want to learn how to invest beyond just multifamily, be sure to check out this event October 11th through the 13th. All you have to do is go to investbeyondmultifamily.com/fall-conference. Again, that's investbeyondmultifamily.com/fall-conference. Now, Tim Little is the founder and CEO of ZANA Investments, a Tampa-based real estate investment firm named after his two daughters, Zara and Lana. Now, he's passionate about helping fellow military veterans escape the landlord trap and get competitive returns by providing opportunities to invest passively in apartment buildings. Now, Tim has a portfolio of over 693 co-owned units valued at over $90 million. Let's welcome to the show, Tim Little.
Thanks, John. Great to be here.
Hey, Tim, it's great to have you on today. I went over your bio at a very high level. Why don't you take 2 minutes and fill in some of those gaps?
Sure. So, most of my background is in the military, right? Signed up straight out of high school. 1 month after graduating, I was at basic training at the tender age of 18, and didn't think that I'd be doing that for very long. Did it for about 2.5 years, decided that was enough for me. I'm taking a break from the military. I'll do my, 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year commitment that I still had to do on top of that, but had no intention of ever coming back in until an ROTC recruiter got to me while I was going to college and said, you know what, I think you might have something to offer, having, been lower ranking on the enlisted side, coming in as a leader, as an officer. And oh, by the way, you'll have a guaranteed job when you graduate college. So all of those things sounded very enticing to me. And so I wound up joining ROTC and did about another 5 years of active duty Army after I got out of undergrad. And at some point in there, I kind of, the real estate bug started fluttering around me, but didn't quite bite me yet. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad somewhere around that, 2005 time frame, something like that, and really started to understand assets versus liabilities, just like so many people do when they read it for the first time. Kind of shifted my mindset a little bit and went to, kind of a sleazy multifamily conference at the time. Because you got to remember, this was when, or actually, I'm sorry, it was a single family investing event. And you got to remember, at this time, this is at the ramp up, right before the financial crisis. So everybody was in real estate. Everybody was becoming a millionaire from real estate, supposedly. And I was like, I want a piece of this. So, I bought some CDs, if that ages me a bit, on how I could go driving for dollars and, buy houses from little old ladies whose husband just passed away and all this kind of stuff. And didn't even have time to implement it. And I think that's probably a good thing, because we know what came next, right? 2008. But I was off on another deployment, didn't have time to do anything with real estate, and kind of put it on the back burner. It wasn't until way later, when I had, gone to grad school, got out, got tons of debt, but then also got a decent job where I felt like I was in a place where, okay, I got a little bit of money. I'm focused on making money again. let me go ahead and start getting back into real estate. So that's when, picked up Rich Dad, Poor Dad, read it again, and started listening to things like Bigger Pockets, like so many people do. And I did that whole, studying thing without actually taking action, which gets you absolutely nowhere. You may know a lot of stuff, but you don't actually do anything. And I was like, the one thing I told myself was, I won't consider myself a real estate investor until I actually have a piece of real estate. So I committed at that point to buying something. And that's when I went and bought a duplex in Richmond, Virginia, while at the time living in Washington, D.C. Reason for that, Washington, D.C., prohibitively expensive, couldn't afford any properties in that area. So went down to Richmond, toured a whole bunch of duplexes over one weekend, and settled on one, put my down payment, and that is where I really got my start in real estate investing. And we could talk about why I went straight to a duplex versus single family, but that's the beginning.
Man, listen, you just gave a lot of great insights in your background. So just to recap a little bit of that, fresh out of high school, a month later, you're in basic training. You do that for a couple of years. You end up going to college. You get recruited by an ROTC person, and they tell you that you would be a really good fit being an officer. So you end up getting your degree, becoming an officer. But then ultimately, from an investing standpoint, you started really learning more about, real estate and assets, liabilities, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, attending that event, not really investing at that time. But once you kind of go through that market cycle, that's when you start to kind of get back re-engaged now that you're kind of making some money and kind of getting your career together. And ultimately, this duplex in Richmond is your first investment. Let's definitely talk about that, right? Because a lot of people may say, well, hey, why not, buy just a single family house? Why a duplex? Tell me a little bit more about, and not just the property itself, but it sounds like you were very intentional about a duplex in Richmond. You took a trip that weekend, toured a bunch of them, picked one that you liked. So talk to me more about kind of the strategy there.
Sure. So I had been what, I guess most people call an accidental landlord before that with my previous residence, right? I had to rent it out, keyword being had to. And so that's why I don't consider that my first investment, because it wasn't an intentional investment. I was just a landlord. And I realized that, when you have a single family property, it's either 100% occupied or 100% vacant. And I wanted to mitigate that risk a bit and also gain economies of scale by going for multifamily properties. And at the time, the most that I could afford was a duplex. And so I was like, so be it, right? At least that way, if I have one unit rented, maybe the other one's vacant, and they kind of offset each other in terms of that risk being mitigated of having to shoulder the mortgage burden all on one tenant. And so again, it comes down to that. If you can't afford something in your backyard, start looking at those concentric circles outside your city. And Richmond, Virginia was, a couple of hours away from Washington, D.C. And so we checked it out, and it was a more affordable market. And in I guess I would call it a rougher neighborhood of Richmond, I was able to find a duplex for $85,000. That seems insane, but at the time, there was a couple within that price range, and this was really like a colonial house that had been divided between the top floor and the bottom floor, and they literally just like sealed up the stairwell and created separate entrances, right? So I was able to buy that duplex for $85,000, put about $20,000 to $25,000 down, not even realizing upfront that I would need a 25% down payment. Again, some of this stuff I should have known, but I learned it as soon as I started putting offers in. And once I got it, had all kinds of problems, but as everyone knows, those challenges lead to learning experiences. That first property, I had to, I would say evict a tenant, but they left before I had the chance because they just stopped paying the mortgage within a few months. And as soon as they left all their stuff, just darted in the middle of the night. had to pay thousands of dollars in order to move their stuff out to get it rent ready. I had to fire my property manager because he refused to come into the 21st century with the rest of us.
Wow.
And so just all these issues, but I learned so much from that first deal, that I think it's valuable in that respect, if that makes
So,
sense.
Tim, what you're describing sounds like the nightmare scenario for a lot of people, right? It's like you
Mhm.
buy this duplex, it's a couple hours away. You have to fire the property manager. The tenant just, evaporates in the middle of the night, stop paying their rent. That sounds like an absolute nightmare. What made you go through that and say, yes, I want more, as opposed to saying, this isn't for me?
I guess one, I believed in the concept, right? I was bought in on the multiple streams of income, and this being one avenue to having another stream of income. And so, I think my calculations at the time were, my goal on paper was, I think, try to get $100 free cash flow per month, and per door. And so I was getting that on this property. I was getting, $200 a month free cash flow. Now, sometimes people forget about if something breaks, or, a tenant trashes the place or something like that. All that profit can be wiped out. But I was also looking at the other side too, the appreciation. So I was kind of hitting it from both sides. And I know you're a huge advocate of going in and ensuring that there's cash flow up front. And that's one thing I did. So I didn't really get too upset over those expenditures that popped up that I wasn't expecting. And I made it more of a long-term plan, right? So I was going to take this duplex, and then I was going to get another one and another one. And then we could talk about that transition, because I think a lot of people, I was like, okay, I need to get 25 duplexes with the cash flow that I talked about in order to reach my freedom number, and quit my job and sit on a beach somewhere. Um, and you run up against those roadblocks of where you're like, wait, where am I going to get the money to buy 25 duplexes, and who's going to give me the mortgages for 25 duplexes, because there's certain restrictions with the banks and everything else. So that's when I started to kind of shift towards the syndication side of things, because I had honestly never heard of it before until I started listening to some podcasts who talked about it. And then I went to my first multifamily convention, where I really just drank from the fire hose for 2 days and just started to scratch the surface of the concepts there.
Yeah, I think the first thing is like, just, you talked about powering through it, right? And just recognizing what your goals were, having, wanting to create $100 of passive income per month per unit. You had the 200 coming from these two duplexes, and you kind of kept your focus there. And I think it's important because so many people don't get started. And you talked even for yourself, you did all this research and all this strategy and all listening to the podcast and reading the books, but you're not a real estate investor until you actually invest in real estate. And the thing that
Mm-hmm.
stops so many people is the fear of the situation you actually experienced. Even despite all that work and research and preparation, that first deal, you had a tenant who left out in the middle of the night. You had to fire a property manager. But I think the cool thing and the important takeaway here is that those are just obstacles that show up along the journey. And if you have the right strategy, sometimes you might need to make some adjustments and some tweaks, but stick to the strategy, stay true to the vision, and results will come. So you were able to do that through that deal. As you were looking to scale, you talked about recognizing that, well, okay, trying to get 25 duplexes may not be as easy to do from a logistics standpoint. So when you were kind of going through and building that portfolio, you talked about going to the conference, but talk to us about kind of that aha where you had to step back and say, you know what, let me recalibrate how I actually reach this goal. Because I think people have a hard time, stepping back and maybe recalibrating and adjusting the tactics, but staying true to the strategy.
Yeah, and so it really was a matter of just doing the math, and part of it is what's on paper is not always going to match reality, right? But once I discovered syndication, it's not something that I necessarily wanted to do like as an active investor, right? I was just intrigued by the idea of passive investing and kind of got attracted to what we'll call vanity metrics, right? And it's easy to fall into that trap to where I say, hey, I own 2 units, and someone else is like, I own 300 units. And you're like, but do you really? Do you really own 300 units? Because um, it's a little bit of it is smoke and mirrors, and we could get into that. But um, I think I made that shift just basically when I saw how much time and effort I was putting into this. And if I was putting this much time and effort into a duplex, and then later I wound up doing a 1031 exchange of that property into a triplex where I was the property manager because it was closer, then you talk about putting some time in. When you're the property manager, while working full time, I was over there every weekend pretty
Is that
much.
what you did? You 1031 into a triplex?
I did. Because I had moved at that point, right? So I was no longer living in Washington, D.C. Now I was in Tampa, Florida. And I saw that it had, gained in value. So I wound up selling that $85,000 duplex for $150,000 without a contingency for inspection on like a 100-year-old house. And I was like, sold. All right, let's let's do this. And what I wound up doing was a 1031 exchange. And for those listeners who aren't familiar with that, is basically I don't collect the proceeds from that sale, right? It stays in there, and I transfer it directly to a new investment, which in this case was a triplex. And because I never touch those proceeds, I never get taxed on it. It's not tax exempt; it's just tax deferred. I'm kicking that can down the road to whenever I choose to take the profits, then I'll pay taxes on it. And so the other thing that I think is not talked about enough with a 1031 exchange is the fact that you don't really have to come out of pocket for a whole lot of money, because instead of putting the 25% down on this now $345,000 triplex, I was simply taking the proceeds from my duplex and using that as the down payment. So I'm able to scale up, quicker using that and not having to come out of pocket. Now, like I talked about, what I wound up doing is being the property manager on that property because it was only like 20 minutes away, but that brought its own set of headaches, and I still learned a lot doing that. But that, I think, solidified to your question when I was like, this is not sustainable from a time perspective for me to grow and scale.
Yeah, and I think too, when you have that vision of, okay, I'm gonna get 25 duplexes, if you're envisioning being the property manager on even a portion of those, it's probably like, there's no way I can do this, especially and have a full-time job, right? And have a family and have a personal life. So it's understandable that you would say, hey, let's find some other options there. You talked about, that conference, right? So talk to me more about kind of apartment syndication. What was, kind of the appeal to you, and what was the first deal you did in that space?
Yeah, so I went to this that first one, and I was intrigued by the concept, but I wanted to kind of see if it was the real deal, right? Some of it sounded too good to be true for someone who had never heard of it before. The tax benefits, all that. So what I decided was that I was going to passively invest first, and that was my only goal at that point, was to passively invest so that I could learn while I earn, as I call it. Because there's 2 ways that you can, learn about syndication. You can, especially when you go to these conferences, you can pay $25,000, $40,000 for their coaching program, or you can find a sponsor and invest that $25,000 with them and be able to ask all the questions that you have within reason. And learn about the process, the questions you should be asking, all about the deals. And at the same time, you're making money instead of paying it in the best case scenario, right? So that's exactly what I did, because I also knew that I was about to go on a deployment. So I wasn't going to be able to take advantage of any type of coaching for almost the next year. So I invested in this deal, $25,000, and the light bulb kind of went off when I got that first distribution check. I think it was 6 months later, and I was like, okay, this is a real thing, right? And so somewhere around that time, I decided, okay, now this is something that I want to do in an active capacity. So when I got back, I wound up going to another multifamily conference, met a whole bunch of people who were eager, hungry, and they came to me, after the conference, some of the guys that I met there, and they're like, hey, Tim, we got a deal. Would you be interested in investing in it? And I was like, no, because I did have capital, but at the same time, I came out of that conference hungry, just like everybody else. Like, I'm going to do my first deal. I need money to put into it, so I have skin in the game. And I had this very, like, I don't know, like I was going to find it, and do everything myself. And that's obviously not the right mentality to have in this business. But, fast forward a couple of months, they came back to me and, right before they needed to kind of close on this deal, still short of capital, came to me and said, hey, Tim, if you still have that capital and you're interested in coming in as a GP, then let's look at some of the things that you could do on this project, and we could bring you in as a general partner. Now, that deal was in Tampa, Florida, so I was boots on the ground. I was able to go to the property, take pictures when needed. I was working with the city in order to, bring together plots and stuff like that. So I was able to provide value in addition to, whatever capital I was bringing to the deal. And that's how I say snuck into my first deal as a general partner. And that was a 59 unit portfolio deal here in Tampa. I think the largest property in the portfolio was like 23 units.
I love it, man. You talked about, going to this event, getting energized, recognizing that you had a deployment coming up. So for you to hire a coach and go deep into the coaching space didn't make as much sense because you didn't know if you'd even have the ability to implement some of the things you were learning. So investing passively was the better option. So you did that first. And once you got that first distribution, you kind of realized, okay, this does work, or there's at least something here that we should continue to pursue. And that led you to say, all right, let's continue to learn a little bit more. You go to another event, you meet some potential partners. They all want to, raise money. You're focused on doing your own deals. So you initially tell them, nope, can't partner with you or can't invest. They kind of come back around and create a scenario that is more enticing, where it's mutually beneficial. You come in as a GP, you invest, but you also have more of a role because you are in Tampa with boots on the ground responsibilities. I want to go back to that thing you said, right? You talked about the right mentality. And there's this belief that a lot of people, I had it too, where you feel like you've got to do it all, right? And I think when you come from, building a smaller portfolio, that's the view. Right now it was similar. I had a 2-unit, 3-unit, 8-unit. I did, me and my wife did everything, right? So I did it all. I found the deal, I underwrote the deal, I signed it alone, I brought all the money. When we hired a property management company, I hired them, I managed them. It was me, right? So when we think about scaling, that's kind of how we think of it, but just bigger properties. But you talked about that wasn't the right mentality. Can you dig into that just a little bit more?
Yeah, and because it's a very different scenario when you go from that single family / small multifamily space to the commercial multifamily. The commercial multifamily space is much more team oriented. It is virtually impossible to do anything on your own. And so when people are taking down these 10 or $20 million, apartment buildings, it's not like usually one or two people. It's usually several groups of general partners that are coming together in order to take this down. And different partners bring different skill sets. They bring their own investor base, and they come together so that they can take down these larger deals. And so that's just not as common, like you said, in the single family / small multifamily, because you're used to doing everything yourself. And I think some investors, at least at first, have a hard time making that mental shift, as I did, when they move up to this very different commercial multifamily space, where I'm often surprised at how cooperative, people are, because you almost expect that it's going to be competitive, but you find that it's much more cooperative.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it's a huge thing for people to understand is that you will hear people say it over and over and over, but multifamily syndication in particular is a team sport. And I heard that on so many podcasts and on people on stages all over the country, right? But it didn't really click until I started to understand, like, and put it in business context. There's no company out there where one person does everything. No successful company, right?
Right.
Even Elon Musk has people he hires who are running marketing or running engineering or running development. So you can't think that you're going to go out there and build your real estate portfolio by yourself. It's not picking stocks, right? You're building a company. And the more you can think of it as a company that needs partners, that needs, boots on the ground, that needs resources, that needs different skill sets, the easier it's going to be for you to adapt to the real estate as a team sport philosophy. And I know it took me a minute. It sounds like it took you a minute to figure that out. But the sooner you can do that, the easier it's going to be for you to scale and grow your portfolio. Tim, so talk to me about kind of where you're at today, right? We talked about the 59 unit portfolio deal that you did. Talk to us more about where you're at today.
Yeah. So, right now, like you said, I think, these vanity metrics, my unit count is the 693 co-owned units valued at nearly $90 million. What does that mean, right? So that's a matter of 5 different properties. And that's the thing. Like, it sounds like it would be a lot of properties, but you can have, like I have one property that's only 24 units. And what we did there was a joint venture. So where we didn't raise money from the outside, we just partnered with each other in order to take it down. And you have a lot more flexibility with something like that because we expect that to be a 10-year hold, right? And that's not something that's palatable to all passive investors. But if you're just partnering up with people you've done business with before, you can do that. Whereas another unit that I have, or another property that I have, is 236 units. So even being a small percentage, partner on that, it increases your unit count pretty significantly. And I just want to hit on, like, one of the things for especially the aspiring syndicators out there, right? Because I know this was something that I had to, I wouldn't say grapple with, but I think that I actually got right, which is, don't be as concerned when you're starting out in this business with the percentage that you're getting if you're coming in on your first deal. Because again, when you're used to that single family side, you're like, hey, I own all of it, it's me. But you have to understand that you're dealing with a larger pie now, and it's okay if you only get a small percentage, especially if it's your first deal and you don't have that track record. I'd say any percentage is a good percentage because there's a certain value that it brings in terms of credibility, right? Now you can move forward after that deal and say, hey, I am a GP, a general partner on a commercial multifamily property. And it provides almost instant credibility for when you go on to the next deal and the next deal and the next deal. So if I could emphasize anything to aspiring syndicators, it's don't get overly concerned with the amount of equity that you're going to get if you haven't had a deal before, because that first deal could launch you to where you want to be, and that in and of itself has its own value.
The thing I love about what you just said, Tim, is that, when you focus on just kind of getting in on the deal and growing and it building your credibility, it's not just credibility for the sake of the perception of others. It's legit experience, right? If you have the ability to be in the room, to have conversations, to understand what it takes to manage 100, 200 unit asset, even just being a general partner where you can talk to them and say, hey, what made you pick this property management company instead of that property management company? Or how are we managing our vacancy loss? Or what are we doing to, increase our turnover time frame, right? But if you could actually have experience and be in the room and talk to these people and have a seat at the table, there's real value in that. And it's not just, for the outside world's perception. What I would strongly urge you to do is make sure you can leverage that opportunity to gain some real experience and gain some real knowledge. Ask questions, as you talked about before. Try to learn to understand how certain decisions are made. Hopefully you can work with a group that's willing to educate you a little bit more, right? And share, hey, here's what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it this way. Here's one of the challenges we're facing. Here's how we're looking to overcome that, because that's going to help you understand how to make those decisions when you're in that driver's seat on your own deals moving forward. So, too many people get caught up in like, oh, I need to make X amount of dollars. You have no experience. It's like an intern, right? You can't come out of school with zero experience and demand a certain salary. You at least have to demonstrate the ability to deliver. So take that opportunity, gain some experience. You're still going to earn some money, but try to gain as much confidence based on actual, work that you've put in and actual knowledge, but also that credibility from being around these guys. And hopefully those guys and girls are able to, get you involved in more deals moving forward so that you can continue to grow on that. I want you just to talk about two things here. One is that you mentioned that you're a partner on a JV that's 24 units, and then literally something 10x, 236 unit, right? So right there at the 10x mark, you're a partner in a 236 unit. How do you decide which deals you want to do if you've got deals that small from a 24 standpoint to almost 240 units?
Yeah. So so I would argue I was going to say you almost need more trust in a JV deal, but honestly, that trust needs to be there for any deal, right? The JV deal is just a little different because again, there's that longer time horizon. Like, hey, will I be able to deal with these people for longer than most marriages last? And that answer better be yes. And so when you're talking about like the 10x, right? The 236 unit, I'd say the biggest thing is, and something that I haven't always been good at since day one, is vetting those partners, right? When I was early on, and this is another thing that happens to a lot of new syndicators, is they get eager. Let's get the next one. Let's get the next one. Let's get the next one. And so, they partner up with people maybe quicker than they should without truly vetting out those partners, looking at their past business record, looking at their level of transparency, how much information they're going to share with you as one of their co-GPs. Because let's face it, not all GPs, general partners, are created equal. Some have a higher status in the pecking order based on the fact that, maybe they're the prime sponsor. They found the deal. They're the ones putting it together. You're coming on to help them take it down. But some of that stuff you need to negotiate for a seat at the table, like we were talking about earlier, so you may negotiate for asset management. And that's something that my partners and I always negotiate in our deals. And the reason for that is twofold, I would say. One, asset management brings usually asset management fees, right? A little extra money. It's not a lot, but it's something. And then two, it provides access and a vote. So access in the sense that, you can sit in on all those property management meetings and you're able to have input into the decisions that are made. Do you have the final vote? Not necessarily, but trust me, it's a lot better to be at the table and let your voice be heard on decisions than not be sitting at that table at all. So that's one thing. What is their willingness to allow you to have that seat at the table? Because again, these are long-term relationships. In terms of which deals we do, there's obviously going to be market dynamics, right? Which markets do we like? If it's a market that we've already vetted and we're already confident in, because maybe we already have properties in that market. Atlanta is a good example. Do we have boots on the ground in that market? And so like Atlanta, for example, one of our partners lives in Atlanta. So he can roll over to that property. He can talk directly to the leasing agents that are there. He can talk to the sheriff to find out why evictions are taking so long. And that's a huge advantage that you want to have, even if the prime sponsor, the one who found the deal, say they have boots on the ground. That's nice, but we want to again have our own level of control on the deal. So those are just some of the things that we look at when we're deciding whether to partner with other general partners, and in terms of what deals we're going to do.
Yeah, you talked about a couple of things, and I think these are really important aspects for everyone to understand. Whether you're an LP or GP, if you're going to partner with people, you want to understand just them, their track record, what's their background, what is your role and responsibility? Will you have access? Can you be a part of these asset management calls, or are you truly kind of silent and just getting updates? What is the communication strategy, right? How frequently will you get updates? Like, is this a two-way communication, or are they just telling you what's going on? So all those things are really important. And you talked about the ability to have boots on the ground, but also to be a part of that asset management team, and to make sure that you are involved and actively knowing what's going on with that property. So really important things to consider whenever you're looking to be involved in a deal. Tim, for anybody who wants to learn more about you and your company, they can go to ZANAinvestments.com. And then, Tim, you also have a podcast as well. Talk to us real briefly about the podcast you've created.
Sure. So my podcast is Journey to Multifamily Millions. And so we have, highly influential guests like yourself on there. And one of the things that we kind of hone in on is how they got started on their journey, and how they became successful. But I think one of the things that a lot of people listening is they don't know what the first step is, and they get stuck before ever taking that first step. So being able to hear how all these successful people got started in their journey should hopefully add a lot of value to those aspiring passive and active investors.
Yeah, listen, so you can check that out anywhere you listen to podcasts. We'll certainly make sure we put a link to that. But Journey to Multifamily Millions, hosted by Tim Little, is a show you should certainly check out. Right now, we're going to transition to our round of insights. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
They say you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you want to grow as a multifamily investor, you have to spend more time with other multifamily investors. And an easy way to do that is to join our apartment investing mastermind group today. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button. Now, as a part of this group, you'll get access to expert trainings, group coaching calls, industry news and updates, as well as all of our webinars and workshops, including our 3-hour workshop on raising capital. Again, if you want to be around other multifamily investors that can help you scale your portfolio today and grow your network, make sure you're a part of the Apartment Investing Mastermind. Just go to casmancapital.com and click on the mastermind button today. Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Failure or apparent failure. I would have to say, just like, again, lessons learned. So I'd say on like one of our earliest deals, it didn't go great in terms of there was different visions between the partners on how the deal should have moved forward. Some were trying to get kind of like squeeze every penny they could out of it without necessarily adding the value that we thought should be added to it, right? And making that community better. And it's a real problem when your vision and your values start to diverge. And again, going back to that, had we vetted those partners better, we probably would have seen that same trend in their previous properties and how they manage them. And so that's something that I carry with me moving forward to really get to know the general partners that we partner with and understand what their vision is and ensure that they have the same values that we have, not only for myself, but for my investors as well.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
So, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I started getting into ChatGPT, and then it kind of fell off for a little bit once the buzz went down. But I'm going back in and really finding ways that it provides practical value to the work that I'm doing. And, that really comes down to training the tool and having it understand what it is you're looking for and being very explicit in your prompts And so as I'm learning that, it's becoming much more useful for me on a day-to-day basis, whether it's, social media postings or, creating a business plan for something or something like that.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
I think the one that I've recommended the most is probably Atomic Habits, just because, it gets into really good detail on the science behind human psychology, but it also has very practical insights on how to implement it in your own life in order to, one, break bad habits and to form new good habits.
Yes, great book there. All right, give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Daily habit that helps me stay focused on my goals is it's really about just taking some time out to think outside of email and everything else. So, at least a couple of days a week, what I do is I get up before the whole house gets up and I just go for a walk, right? Just one, to get some steps in, because that's important, especially when I sit at a desk most of the day. But two, I listen to like a business or self-improvement book on Audible. And that's my opportunity to kind of think about all the ways that I could make my business better. I'll have these thoughts about, how I could implement it that day or next week or the following month. So really just getting out there, getting away from everything and internalizing, some of those business or self-help books on a nice walk in the morning.
Give me your number one insight for multifamily investing.
Number one insight. I would say you need to know enough to be dangerous, right? You don't need to be an absolute expert to the point where you're underwriting these deals in detail yourself. But at the same time, you don't want to just hand off your money and say, do good things. Because if you can't ask intelligent questions, then you're not able to uncover those red flags that might appear.
Great answer there. All right, let's lighten the mood. You're in Tampa still, right?
I am, yes.
All right, so you're in Tampa. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
All right, so the best place that we found recently is Edison Food and Drink Lab. It's a pretty nondescript place in downtown Tampa. You think it might be like a hole in the wall, but you walk in and it's still not pretentious at all, but the food is from like a 5-star restaurant and it's very inventive and unique. So for anyone wanting to check it out, if you can get reservations, go to Edison Food and Drink Lab.
I love it, man. We'll definitely have to make sure we check that one out the next time we're in the area. Tim, you gave us a lot of great insights, talking about kind of your background in the military, making that transition to start investing in real estate, start on the LP side, transitioning to the GP side of the table, but also just the transparency of saying, hey, you know what? Here's what I've done. Here's what, my team is. Here's how we look at deals. Here's how we look at potential partnership opportunities. Lots of great insights for our listeners to understand how to just, look at opportunities, but also have the right mindset. And I love the fact that when you had that duplex and you had, that resident who left in the middle of the night, it didn't sway you from your vision, right? The last thing you said too that stood out to me was how people act when the vision doesn't match your values. I think that's a really important barometer. Is like everyone has values until it costs them something. So what's the vision? What's the values? How do they align? And then how do you make sure that, anybody you're working with has those two things in alignment as well? Tim, again, if they want to reach out to you, learn more about you or your company, they can go to ZANA Investments.com. I want to thank you again for being a great guest. We look forward to staying in touch and hope you have a great day.